They never understood that the way they treated you was not happening in a vacuum. Every insult, every betrayal, every moment they tried to make you feel small was being recorded in the spiritual realm in ways they could not imagine. When they mocked your pain, they thought they were getting away with it because you stayed quiet. When they disrespected your spirit, they assumed your silence was surrender. When they pushed you to the edge and expected you to crumble, they believed no one was watching. But they forgot one crucial truth: when a chosen one is attacked, the universe does not stay still. What they did to you was not just cruelty, it was a provocation to the divine forces assigned to your life. And while they thought they were rising in power, they were actually triggering a reversal that was already forming behind the scenes. People like them operate with the belief that their actions have no spiritual consequences. They think hurting someone pure, someone favored, someone destined, is just another moment of power for them. They don't realize that every chosen soul is protected by a higher order, a divine law that responds to injustice in ways humans can't see until the shift begins. When they mistreated you, they activated a divine reversal they never saw coming. The more they pushed you down, the higher the reversal would lift you. The more they tried to break your spirit, the more the divine prepared to break the illusions they lived in. They thought they were dimming your light, but the truth is they were fueling the fire that would expose their intentions. There were moments when they underestimated your strength because you weren't fighting back the way they expected. They didn't realize that your calm was not weakness but alignment. While they were plotting against you, you were being elevated spiritually. While they tried to sabotage you, unseen forces were rearranging circumstances in your favor. They believed their cruelty would damage your purpose, not knowing that chosen ones do not lose in silence, they prepare in silence. Your tears became seeds. Your suffering became a signal to the divine that it was time to shift the spiritual atmosphere in your favor. Your patience activated a timing they could never interrupt. Their mistreatment was more than emotional harm, it was an attempt to interfere with destiny. And destiny never allows interference without consequence. They touched what they were never allowed to touch. They spoke against what they were never authorized to speak against. They tried to block pathways that were divinely assigned to open for you. Without realizing it, they positioned themselves against a plan they had no power to stop. And the moment they crossed that line, the divine reversal began its work. Every scheme they set, every trap they built, every lie they spread became part of the weight that would fall back onto them. What they thought was their victory was actually their undoing. You were not meant to respond in anger because the universe itself responded for you. You didn't need to fight back physically because your spiritual protection fought for you. They misread your restraint as vulnerability, not understanding that divine timing was gathering momentum. When the divine steps in, it does not do it lightly. It steps in with precision. It steps in with purpose. It steps in when the scales are ready to be balanced. And the scale that held your pain, your quiet strength, your resilience had finally grown heavier than the scale of their deceit, cruelty, and arrogance. They thought you would stay down forever. They thought your isolation meant defeat. They thought your silence meant brokenness. But they didn't know that chosen souls transform pain into elevation. They didn't understand that divine reversals require the chosen one to experience pressure before release. All the moments you spent questioning why they targeted you were also the moments the divine was preparing the shift that would elevate you beyond their reach. They believed they had control over the narrative, but the true narrative was never theirs to hold. Everything they tried to build against you was built on unstable ground, and divine reversal began shaking that ground the moment they mistreated you. You were always meant to rise, but their actions accelerated a rise that would have taken much longer. They didn't know they were pushing you into alignment. They didn't know they were driving you toward clarity. They didn't know they were exposing themselves so you could detach without guilt. Their mistreatment revealed their true nature, and once it was revealed, the divine had every spiritual justification to begin shifting blessings, opportunities, and protection toward you. They unlocked doors for you by trying to close others. They triggered breakthroughs by trying to block progress. They awakened your inner strength by underestimating your spirit. The reversal is not just a change in circumstances, it is a rebalancing of spiritual order. What they took from you is returning multiplied. What they tried to strip away is being restored with power. What they tried to dim is now glowing brighter. They activated something they cannot undo, something they cannot outrun, something they cannot silence. Their mistreatment did not weaken your destiny, it awakened it. Their attacks did not stop your path, they triggered the shift that lifts you into the next dimension of your purpose. Your silent endurance became the very thing that shifted the spiritual atmosphere around you. While they believed their attacks were weakening you, they didn't understand that your quiet strength was awakening forces far beyond their comprehension. They mistook your calmness for defeat, but they had no idea that every moment you chose peace over reaction, every time you held your tongue instead of retaliating, every time you walked away instead of collapsing, you were activating a power that watches silently but moves decisively. There is something sacred about the pain a chosen one endures in silence. It carries a frequency that heaven responds to. It signals to the divine that one of its own is being targeted, and the response to that signal is never passive. They underestimated the power of your patience. They thought they were getting away with mistreating you simply because you didn't expose them, confront them, or match their level of darkness. They believed no one knew what they were doing behind the scenes. But the spiritual realm saw it all. The lies, the manipulation, the attempts to sabotage your name, your peace, your progress. They thought those things were hidden. They didn't know that while they were whispering in secret, the divine was listening in silence. Their actions may have been concealed from the eyes of others, but they were never concealed from the eyes of truth. Your endurance put you under divine observation. The way you kept your heart soft despite what they did, the way you refused to become what they were, the way you held onto your integrity even when they tried to stain it, those choices placed you in alignment with protection and revelation. You didn't realize it in those painful moments, but your silence was not empty. It was a spiritual stance. It was a declaration without words. It was a refusal to surrender your character to the cruelty of others. And while you held that stance, your spirit was sending out a call that awakened a power prepared to expose everything that was done against you. There is a unique authority that moves when a chosen one is wronged. It is not immediate, because your endurance must be witnessed. But once witnessed, it becomes unstoppable. You became a vessel of truth simply by refusing to mirror their darkness. And that truth began to rise, slowly at first, then forcefully. The people who betrayed you with smiles on their faces didn't realize that the same smiles would one day be removed by the exposure of their own actions. Those who lied about you didn't understand that the spiritual realm keeps perfect records. Those who tried to manipulate situations around you didn't know that manipulation cannot stand in the presence of divine clarity. Your endurance unlocked that clarity. It began as a whisper in your intuition. You started seeing who people truly were, not who they pretended to be. You began recognizing patterns, motives, hidden intentions. You started feeling a shift in the energy around you, the kind that only appears when truth is preparing to rise to the surface. At first, it may have felt like emotional detachment, a gradual distancing from people you once trusted. But in reality, it was divine separation. You were being moved away from the shadows because the light was about to expose them. The spiritual power that awakened because of your endurance is the same power that exposes what is hidden. It reveals conversations spoken behind closed doors. It uncovers intentions buried beneath false kindness. It exposes enemies disguised as supporters. It breaks illusions that were meant to keep you confused. This power does not reveal everything at once, it reveals strategically. You began receiving clarity exactly when you needed it, not a moment too soon and not a moment too late. That timing was not coincidence. It was divine orchestration responding to your endurance. They assumed you were blind to their actions. They thought their masks were convincing. They believed the narratives they created about you would stick. But the spiritual exposure that came with your endurance began unraveling those narratives. People who once believed their lies began seeing inconsistencies. Situations that were twisted against you suddenly turned with no logical explanation. Connections that were meant to break you instead broke apart around them. Their own behavior started revealing who they truly were without you ever needing to say a word. Your silence held a mirror to their character. And the divine positioned that mirror perfectly. The more you focused on healing, the more their actions reflected back onto themselves. They couldn't blame you anymore because your endurance had made you blameless. They couldn't hide anymore because the spiritual power awakened by your restraint illuminated everything they tried to keep in the dark. What was once concealed began surfacing in unexpected ways. People started noticing. Energy around them became heavier. Doors they forced open through manipulation began closing. Opportunities they stole from you started slipping from their hands. Not because you retaliated, but because your endurance activated a spiritual justice they cannot escape. The exposure that has begun around them is not meant to embarrass you or elevate your ego. It is meant to restore balance. It is meant to reveal truth. It is meant to return to you everything that was taken through deceit. The divine does not allow a chosen one to suffer in silence without purpose. Your endurance was the key that unlocked what needed to be seen. It rearranged the spiritual order, bringing truth to the forefront, stripping illusions, collapsing false structures, and revealing every hidden enemy who dared to rise against you. The consequences they tried to send your way have already begun circling back to them, even if you haven't seen it fully unfold yet. Every negative intention, every plan they crafted in secret, every attempt to block your progress carried an energy that could not attach itself to you because you were spiritually protected. So that energy had only one place left to go, back to the source that created it. They didn't understand that when a chosen one is targeted, the attack doesn't reach the intended destination. It's intercepted, redirected, and eventually returned. They thought they were harming you, but they were creating the blueprint for their own downfall. They thought they were burying you, but they were digging the ground beneath their own stability. Their actions were never without consequence, they were simply delayed by divine timing so the impact would be greater when truth surfaced. People like them operate with arrogance, believing they can move through life harming others with no spiritual repercussions. They rely on manipulation, lies, and trickery, assuming those methods will shield them from accountability. But life doesn't work that way for those who aim attacks at someone divinely protected. There is a spiritual law that governs energy, what you send out returns to you multiplied. They violated that law. They pushed it, tested it, stretched it, thinking their cruelty was cleverness. But the universe always balances itself. Every sabotage they attempted against you has shaped the consequence now forming in their own lives. The very weapons they crafted with precision and malice were the same weapons destined to collapse their illusions. You may not have noticed the shift at first because divine justice often moves quietly before it moves visibly. Their lives began to experience subtle breakdowns, unexpected conflicts, growing stress, opportunities slipping through their fingers, relationships turning sour, the same confusion they tried to plant in you now clouding their own path. These shifts were not coincidences. They were the early signs of spiritual return, reminders that nothing done in darkness remains hidden forever. Your enemies built their foundations on deception, and those foundations are now showing cracks. The consequences they hoped you would suffer are becoming the very storms they must now endure. What they failed to understand is that your heart was never a battleground for chaos. You were divinely shielded. Even when you felt vulnerable, hurt, or betrayed, you were protected in ways you could not see. The reason their attacks did not destroy you is the same reason the consequences they created now cannot be avoided. The divine chose you, which means any harm aimed at you becomes redirected energy. They tried to create blockages, but those blockages transformed into openings for you and traps for them. Everything they projected onto you, fear, shame, confusion, loss, became the very energy circling back into their own lives because your spirit refused to accept it. You were not meant to carry the weight of their intentions. Your resilience acted like a shield. Their plots disintegrated the moment they touched your energy. Your spirit recognized the danger long before your mind understood it, and that inner knowing kept you safe. Now, the same spiritual laws that protected you are beginning to hold them accountable. The masks they wore are crumbling. Their manipulations are being revealed. Their influence is weakening. The power they believed they had is slipping away because it was never real, it was borrowed through deceit. And borrowed power always returns to its rightful owner. The consequences returning to them are not punishment, they are alignment. The universe is simply correcting the imbalance they created. You were meant to advance, and they attempted to halt that advancement. You were meant to rise, and they tried to anchor you in the past. You were meant to heal, and they tried to reopen wounds. None of it worked because your path is divinely protected. They interfered with something sacred, and when people interfere with the sacred responds with force. Not anger, but justice. Not vengeance, but restoration. Not destruction, but rebalancing. As these consequences unfold, you may feel moments of confusion or reflection, wondering why people who hurt you suddenly face challenges. But understand this, it is not your doing. It is the natural return of energy. You did not wish harm on them. You did not seek their downfall. You simply survived their attacks. And survival alone is enough to activate the return of everything they intended for you. Your role is not to watch with bitterness, but to step into the blessings now making their way to you. The consequences they face are theirs to carry, just as the blessings you receive are yours to embrace. There will come a moment when you fully recognize the shift. You will see how everything they meant to break you actually positioned you for growth. You will understand how their attempts to stop you accelerated your transformation. You will witness how the divine used their negativity as fuel for your elevation. And in that moment, you will realize that you were never losing, never forgotten, never powerless. You were simply being preserved for a season where everything becomes clear. Their consequences are unfolding, and your blessings are rising. This is the divine return they cannot escape, and the restoration you were always destined to receive.